Now that you know about the fundamentals of Flexbox, let's finally start adding Flexbox to our blog post project. Okay, so let's go back here to our project and give it a better width. And so this is the layout that we built before using floats. And we also did a lot of other stuff using floats, like putting this text here side by side with the image, and also here putting this navigation on the right side and the heading on the left side. And so let's now go ahead and disable all of this so that we can now do the same thing, but using Flexbox. Okay, so now we are back to what it looked like before using floats. And so again, let's now fix this once again. Okay, and we will start here with the navigation at the heading. So putting these once again side by side. So the way we did it before was to float both the h1 and the nav. But now, of course, we will use Flexbox. And so where do we actually need to use Flexbox? Or in other words, what element should be the flex container here? Well, it needs to be the element that is the parent of both of these, right? And so that is the main header. So the element which has this main header class, right? So just to make sure, let's quickly check that out in the markup here. And so indeed, the main header is the parent of both the h1 and the nav. All right, and so let's make this the flex container by setting display to flex. So this will already put them side by side. And so now let's fix here the vertical alignment. Now there's just one thing that we need to do. So you see that all of these links here, they have a margin to the top of 10 pixels. So this one here. And so we want to remove that now. And we actually want to remove that forever. So let's do that not here, which is for the Flexbox part. But let's do it up there where we actually defined that. So you see that our CSS is growing bigger, and so it's getting harder to find the code that we're looking for. And so in a bigger project, we will of course find a way of organizing this a little bit better. So removing this, and you see that it moved up now. But again, we now want these two to be vertically aligned. And do you remember how we do that? Well, we just use align items, which by default aligns items vertically. And so if we say center, then automatically they move here to the center. So that's great, very easy. There is no way to manually add some padding or some margin until it is centered. So in this way it happens automatically, which is a lot better. And now the next thing that we want to do is to basically push this one here to the right side. So this entire navigation. So whenever we have just two flex items and we want to push each of them to one side, then the perfect thing to do is to use justify content. So remember, justify content is similar to align items, but this one is to align items basically horizontally by default. So remember that we could set it to center as well, which would then look like this. So now these two are in the very center of the header, but what we want is actually space between. And so this will basically take all the empty space and divide that as a space between them. And in case we only have two elements, then that means that all the remaining space will stay between the both of the flex items. And so as a consequence of that, each of them gets pushed to one of the sides. Nice. So this one is fixed. So let's move on to the next one, which is this part here. So we want this text here to be back side by side with the image, right? So once again, let's ask ourselves, what should be the flex container? Or in other words, what parent element of these two elements here makes sense to become the flex container? Well, let's check out our HTML, and I like to do that now right here in the inspector, so in the DevTools. And I think it's a bit too small. Again, let's make it bigger. And so these two are the elements that we are interested in. So image and P. However, the flex container should not really be this one, right? I mean, it is the parent of the image and the paragraph, but also of all these other elements. So that's not really going to work, is it? Let's actually try that out. Post header and set display to flex. But that should look very weird, and indeed it does, because now this here is the flex container and all of these are flex elements which are now placed side by side, at least if possible. And so of course this is not what we want, and so the solution is to create a new element which will be the parent of the image and this paragraph. All right, so that can just be a simple div because we don't need any meaning for that. So let's call this the author box. And now let me use that trick where I hit the Option or Alt key together with the arrow down key to move down this div element. So this closing tag. And so this is an easy way of wrapping two elements inside of a new parent element. So this is the class author box, which should now become the flex container instead of post header. Let's see. And immediately they are side by side. So that's beautiful. Now all we need to do is to once again vertically center them. And then we could also add some space here to the image maybe to give ourselves some space here between these two. So once again, we are going to use align items and set to center. All right. Well, that actually looks a bit strange. So it's not really centered. And I think that's because there is some margin happening. Yes, that's right. And so in this situation, the margin is then kind of part of the element when it comes to vertical centering. All right. So let's actually remove that margin because it doesn't make much sense. Then here I thought that this image actually had some margin to the bottom, but maybe it does not. Okay, but anyway, what we want to do is to permanently remove the margin bottom from this one. So let's select simply the author here, and then let's overwrite that. So basically set it back to 0. Okay. So we have not selected this author class before. So let's just do that here. So the margin at the bottom should be 0. And then let's actually add a margin to the left here to create that space between the image. So margin left, 15 pixels. And here we go. Nice. Now let's just add some space between this new author box that we created and this element here. So I'm adding another margin left of 15 pixels, or actually margin bottom, of course. Okay, beautiful. And now it's actually finally time to style this one here a little bit better. So each of these li elements here are kind of a mess right now. Let's actually check out the markup, and we can do that here again, right here. So we have the li's, and all it does is to have an image and the A and the P in there. But what we really want is to have this anchor and this paragraph side by side with the image. So let me see. Yeah, so this here is what we want. So on one side the image, and on the other side some box, which then contains these two elements right here. So let's add some classes here to our markup so we can actually style it now finally. So this entire UL is called related. So let's give each of the LIs the class of related post. So copying all of this, and ideally we add these classes right in the beginning when we actually start writing our markup. All right, so we don't just do it later, because that is a bit more work. Because now we actually also should add some classes here to these hyperlinks. So the P's already have related author, so let's call this one here the related link. So class related link. And then add that to the other two. And there we go. Now going back here to our CSS, the flex container should probably be the related post, right? So related post and set display to flex. And this is the one. But now we have the problem where all of the three are now flex items. So you see, this one and this one and this one are all flex items. And that is not what we want. So I think I mentioned that earlier, that we want these two here to be in the same box so that that box can then be on the right side of the image. So I forgot to do that here. So let's do it now. So I'm just again wrapping it inside of a div. Then here I hit enter, and again I use option and arrow down to move it down and give it a save. And this one here doesn't really need any name. We really just need this box so that this box with this content can then be at the right side of this image. So again, the trick of moving down this div so that closing tag and here the same. Well, I should at least spell it right, like this. And if we check it out now, then that finally looks right. Okay. And now we then need to also vertically align this once again. Let's actually make this smaller again so we can immediately see our results. So at this point, it should be easy to vertically align them, right? So align items center. All right, nice. But now once again, there is this problem that one of these elements, I guess, still has an old margin. So that is a problem that happens when we start writing code first with floats, for example, or just adding some random margins everywhere, and only later we start refining the code. So that's happening because we're still learning here, but in the future, all of this will become a bit easier. So don't worry that this is all a mess. So in this case, we still have this problem that by default, we assigned a margin bottom to the paragraphs. So let's get this related author here and remove that. So related author, and then let's say margin bottom and put it back to 0. And since we're here, let's actually also style this. So font size 14 pixels. And many of the things that we need to do here is to now kind of reset some of the things we did earlier. So for example, for some reason this is bold. So let's put it back to normal. So font weight should be normal. And now let's actually style all of these as italic. And let's wait for it. Yeah, that looks quite nice already. Let's quickly now style these links here actually. And then once we're done with that, we will add some spacing here. So let's do that here. So related link, and then never forget that we need to use the link pseudo class. All right. So let's say font size 17 pixels. There's a small bug. Then here the font weight should be bold, but the font style should be normal. So again, in the very beginning of the course, we wrote some style that made it so that this very first element is bold and the last one is italic. And so here we are just resetting that instead of going back all the way and fixing that code. Okay, so that looks a bit better. Let's just add some margin here to the bottom of this anchor. So margin bottom, let's say 5 pixels. And this is once again just to show you something, because this actually did not work. So it looks exactly the same. And can you guess why that is happening? Well, the reason is that the anchor, remember, is an inline element. And therefore, vertical spacing like margin bottom and margin top do not apply. So to fix that, let's simply display it as a block. And then this keeps jumping up. But anyway, now we get our nice space here, right? And now just to finish, let's add that gap here, so that spacing. So how could we do that? Well, there are 3 different ways, actually. So we could select this image here, then add some space to the right. We could select this box, which contains these 2. So this div here, and then add some space to the left. Or we could use that other property on the Flex container that I showed you earlier, which is the gap property. And that is personally my absolute favorite. And so let's do that. So the related posts here, remember, is the Flex container. And we can easily see that because that's the one who has display set to Flex. And then let's add a gap of 20 pixels. And nice, there it is. The only problem with the gap property in Flexbox is that only the very latest versions of Safari actually support them. So on the Mac and on Safari, until a couple of weeks ago, gap was actually not supported. But now it is, and so we can maybe start using it, especially if you are watching this in the far future. Anyway, let's now also add some margin here to the bottom of 30 pixels to add some space between these. And we also then need to remove it from the last one. So as usual, all of them get this. Well, actually it doesn't. So this has the margin bottom, this and this doesn't. So I guess we already wrote some style which did this. So indeed, we somewhere selected all the list elements, and then the last child, we set margin bottom to 0. All right, and so that fixed it then for us here in this situation as well. Okay, and actually I think that's it for transforming the smaller parts of the page to Flexbox. So Flexbox is absolutely perfect for these small component layouts that we just built here. And we will not replace these with CSS Grid later. So instead we will use Flexbox and CSS Grid together when the time comes. But next we will finally build the same layout that we did before with floats, but with Flexbox. So stay tuned for that one.